Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to span the range from the 18th through the 32nd verses of Paul's first chapter in his epistle to the Romans. And the title I've elected to call this discourse is The Sewer of Society. That is a tidbit I acquired through a Mennonite Bible study. I think the Mennonites are good people. They're a little too extreme in their observances of certain practices, but dialogue should be fostered. They're a good Bible-believing people, and you don't have to join them to have interdenominational dialogues. And they offered a Bible study, and they said some things that will stick with me for the rest of my life. And probably easily one of the most memorable ones is the sewer of society. So in approaching the list, the negative examples of human depravity, we can see the society. We are literally living in it, but I also want us to try and look and see at ourselves in it. So to see it in ourselves, we don't have to look far to see it around us, but what do we play? What did we play? Because before we became Christians, we were dead in trespasses and sins. So this was our life before we came, and we should never really lose sight or focus of this. And I did a similarly titled discourse a little over a year ago. It was one of my better early ones, but it was still an early one. So, I've thought about it a lot since then, and I want to share what's on my heart and mind right now. But before we do that, we just want to briefly review what takes place. Not a whole lot of context to establish. Rome had an assembly that was planted by the early believers at Pentecost. They were in the audience, and they received the Spirit and planted the faith back in the center of the Roman Empire. And we read in the 13th verse that Paul had not yet landed there, and he would not visit the assembly. He would land in Rome in chains as a prisoner. That's where the book of Acts leaves off in the 28th chapter. But he gives his customary greetings and doxology, but really and we're going to devote a separate lesson to what comes before verses 1 through 17, because there's a lot to digest here. But we just want to briefly read 16 and 17 before we read and comment more extensively than we will on the two before that comes at 18. For I am not ashamed of the good news of Messiah, for it is the power of Elohim for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Gentile. So Paul is not ashamed. He would not do or go the lengths that he went through or do the things he did or be mocked and belittled and abused if he were ashamed of the gospel. He did it all because he was not ashamed. And the God, coming a Christian and saying it out loud is an act of courage. We have to eliminate whatever shame. Don't care what people say. Don't care what people think. Just be who you are. Be who you're meant to be. Because in being that is the power of salvation to everyone who believes. So we are to be a living witness and lighthouse to bring others into the same power of salvation, which has set us free and lifted us up. And it comes to the Jew first. It originated from them, but their message was spread to the Gentiles. Earlier in the 14th verse, Paul writes, I am a debtor both to the Greek and foreigners, both to wise and to foolish. So even though Paul was a Jew, an original depositor of the good news message, he considered himself indebted to the Gentiles who influenced his thought. And so a lot of stuff from Plato's stamp is clearly on Paul. But for in it is the righteousness of Elohim is revealed from faith to faith, as it has been written, but the righteous shall live by faith. So this is one of the three occasions in the New Testament where the writings of Habakkuk, the 2nd chapter, 4th verse, are repeated. And Habakkuk was a man who struggled by doubt. He struggled with the vision that Yahweh had shown him of his beloved Jerusalem in desolation and ruin, and he's told to live by faith. So he has to have faith that it will be restored and healed and whole. And the same thing is true. The same path is both for the Jew and the Gentile. So we are equals, even though they came before us. We are equally commanded and called to live by faith. So the 18th verse reads, For the wrath of Elohim is revealed from the heavens against all wickedness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. The wrath of Elohim is not a petty irrational outburst or petty a response to a petty slight. It is the merited retribution for a planet that is completely wayward. The world is totally subsumed with evil because of the creatures he has entrusted to it. They are wicked and unrighteous, and because they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Now, why is the thought of God being eliminated from our society right now? And the answer is they're getting him out of the schools. So his name's not even allowed to be mentioned. This instills the impious imagination in children that he is not real, he does not exist, his name is forbidden at what should be the factory of all knowledge. The source of all knowledge is forbidden. This is the irony and the tragedy of our times, but the reason that the idea is not flourishing is because it is suppressed from a very early age, and those who advance far in academia kind of carry that with them. So it really takes, without Christian schools, Christian homes are the only hope to get children reared in biblically principled homes or lives. Because that which is known of Elohim is manifest among them, for Elohim has manifested to them. So they have the consequence of suppressing the truth. They reject and refuse to let it shine to others because they don't like what it is. So they suppress it in all unrighteousness because their wicked existence is exposed bare naked for what it is. So even though they have the evidence literally all around them that Elohim he is just, he is loving, he is kind, their wicked hearts suppress that which is manifest to them. They don't want God to exist, so they eliminate him with the idea, then they live their lives as if he doesn't exist, and then they die in their sins and wake up to the realization that he was real and he does judge, and you should have taken this life more seriously and listened to him, because in one form or another he does make himself known to just about everyone who's ever lived. For since the creation of the world, his invisibilities have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, both his everlasting power and mightiness, for them to be without excuse. So he charges that the existence of creation renders the natural observer, the natural man, the ordinary human, renders them without excuse for not believing in the existence of a creator. Because of all the theory of origins, the only one that makes sense is that there is a God who is all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing, and capable of being everywhere at once. So everywhere in the world, in creation, is a visible witness of his invisible essence, which brought into being all that is visible. And this implies a creator who was smart and wise enough to conceive a perfect design of laws of physics and everything moving in motion, and powerful enough to bring it into being and wish it to pass, and also capable of being everywhere at once. So the witness of Elohim, of the creator in creation, is one who is omnipresent. That's the attribute of capable of being everywhere at once all the time. And omniscient, this is the attribute of unlimited or infinite intelligence, and omnipotent, which is the attribute of infinite or unlimited strength. So it wasn't enough for him to conceive creation. He had to bring it into being with the might and power of his touch. Because although they knew Elohim, they did not esteem him as Elohim, nor give thanks, but became vain in their reasonings, and their undiscerning heart was darkened. So idolaters do not just become idolaters, they choose to become idolaters because they have the existence and the witness and the testimony of God somewhere in the world, or in some person, or in some form, yet they do not acknowledge him, or they do not give gratitude or express praise. And the Father sheds his light to shine and rain to pour indiscriminately on the righteous and the unrighteous alike, Matthew 5:45, but the righteous are grateful to receive it. They pay homage to whom it is owed, thank him for his provision, whereas the idolater will not give thanks, but they are vain. That means self-centered, egotistical, prideful, petty in their reasonings, and they lack the trait of discernment, which can detect divinity in creation and nature, but their heart is darkened because they want it to be darkened. They don't want to see the light. They suppress the truth and the light in all unrighteousness. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. So a lot of people who are wise in the ways of the world are foolish in the estimation and in the final analysis of heaven and earth. Now, I've met people with extraordinary IQs, and they can dissect just about any subject, but you talk to them about God, and they just can't get it. They can't grasp it. So there is a wisdom that is simple. Wisdom is simple, and it's not overly complex. And I think a lot of these hyper-intellectuals work themselves into a sophisticated stupor of foolishness because their worldview, it's so self-reliant and relying on the eyes of sight that they outright dismiss the idea of God, who is the source of all wisdom. He is the one who created every fact in existence, which sustains the entire network of every other fact in existence. So people who are knowledgeable, who can claim to be wise, are not what they claim. Now, there is a difference between knowledgeable. Some of the best, brightest minds in the world are knowledgeable and geniuses, but not every genius is wise. And wisdom, as Scripture defines it, is a faithful, fearful life, fearful towards Elohim, which is an act and expression of faith. And change the esteem of the incorruptible Elohim into the likeness of an image of corruptible man, and of birds, and of 4-foot beast, and of reptiles. So the idolater has eliminated the idea altogether that of Elohim. So what he does is he manufactures his own deity, because man has to have a supernatural force to follow, and one does not need to. Either he's going to worship the Elohim, the true Elohim, or he's going to manufacture his own, and the substitute that reverses the idea. So the essence of idolatry is God is made in man's image, and reptiles and just debaser creatures. So the creator is diminished by being represented by creation. But this stemmed from the polytheistic concept of the pagans, so they envisioned their deities as having territorial jurisdiction over certain cities and nations and peoples, and also elements in the weather and elements in nature and just about everything else. But at some point, they made the conscious decision to forsake the true religion and embrace the idols and manufacture the god to their liking to live as they pleased, because it all ties into the sins, which so the spiritual sins of idolatry lead to the moral sins, which are going to come after this. Therefore Elohim gave them up to an uncleanness in the lust of their hearts, to disrespect their bodies among them. So they want to worship beasts, they're going to become beasts. They're going to be subject to their own carnal lust of their hearts. They're going to think with their penis and just be sexually oriented creatures, because when God doesn't exist, pleasure is the supreme source of satisfaction, and when one doesn't treat their body like the temple of the Ruach Kadesh, that means it's a law unto themselves, it's immediate gratification, and even its peccadillos are okay. And some of the peccadillos of sexual sin, which is rooted in idolatry, is homosexual. It is unnatural in the same sense that it defiles the integrity of creation by seeking to pay the Creator his homage and due, who changed the truth of Elohim into the falsehood, and worshipped and served what was created rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So this ties into what we earlier mentioned about becoming, they substitute the truth of Elohim for a falsehood. They know he's greater than crocodile skin or snake skin or man. He doesn't have the arms of the man, but they're humanizing and animalizing their God in humanizing and animalizing and deifying themselves. So the idolaters' manufactured gods are what they believe to be true. So truth, they have their own relative truth and source of morality, but they have it all wrong because they're worshiping what is created rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. So these idols, they can bring some temporary good luck, but it's ultimately not faith, it's superstition. But the one who is blessed forever, who can bring eternal blessings, is the one who created us and made us to know better than the carnal man does not. Because of this, Elohim gave them up to degrading passions, for even their women exchange natural relations for that which is against nature. So this describes homosexuality between females as unnatural, and if it's unnatural between them, it's going to be unnatural between us. So there is a fine line between, now the excuse of a lot of gay people is that God made me this way, but if you cannot recognize the difference between the divine and the demonic, you are in dangerous territory. And likewise the men also, having let the natural relations with women burn in their lust for one another, men with men committing indecency, and receiving back the reward which was due for their straying. So in the earlier version I gave to this, I may have mentioned I did something titled this way a year ago, but I feel I commented excessively on the controversy of homosexuality. I think it should be quashed with minimal enough effort. Of course, we should let them in, and because every sin that's lifted after here, we can at least in some way relate, so we shouldn't use them as the single boy, as the whipping boys and girls of the sins which we have all committed. It is a sin, but it is not necessarily more grievous than any other sins, and every sinner deserves a second chance. And as much talk of the courage it takes to coming out as a gay Christian is often more courageous than coming out and just, doing your own perverted thing. But, we should respect the people in there who suffer with this sickness and want to make it better. They're in the right place. We should be welcoming them and guiding them through the transition to a more natural sexual orientation. And even as they did not think it worthwhile to have the knowledge of Elohim, Elohim gave them over to a worthless mind to do what is improper. That's the third time we read this phrase, gave them over, gave them up. That means he knows he created us with free agency. So there comes a time in the sinner's life where he intervenes no more, and he says, I give them up. I surrender them to the consequences of their own action. And we should thank God if there is a war raging, if we can feel the lure of temptation and feel the demons working on us night and day. That is a sign that we still have spiritual stimuli. So it's really when he gives us up. Wouldn't that be an awful thing if he just said, don't convict him, don't convert him, he's only got another 10 years to live, let him go? That would be an awful thing. And the worthless mind is a depraved mind and reprobate mind, and it can only do what is improper because it is worthless and oriented towards worthless activity. So the mental determines the physical. If we think worthless thoughts, we'll do worthless deeds. Having been filled with all unrighteousness, whoring, wickedness, greed, evil, filled with envy, murder, fighting, deceit, evil habits, whisperer. So this is a list of vices. Now, we earlier described what they are. They're idolaters, they're suppressors of truth, they're sexual deviants. Now, what they are is filled with unrighteousness. That's their defining characteristic. Whoring is what they do because they're wholly given to their carnal appetites. They're going to be guided by their sexual appetite to go where they go and do what they want to do. Wickedness, greed. Greed is sin. It's tied to the sin of covetousness, where we take more than what we need for survival, for satisfaction. And so that is a temptation for a lot of people, because greed can come in any form. It's not just money. It can be greed for anything that we may need, but, taking beyond what is necessary for our natural survivor. Evil, filled with envy. Envy is a sin. Envy is the root of all evil. Envy is what compelled Cain to slay Abel, and it's been with us ever since. Murder is obviously an extreme expression of violent passion, but fighting is the lesser form, so fighting leads to murders. Deceit, when you're worshiping a lie, your life is going to be a living lie, because the idol, the God in your life, determines the moral character. So the moral model we align ourselves with will determine our character and nature, and that will determine our destination. And evil habits, whisperers, these are people, busybodies, gossips. Great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, base minds discuss people. So a whisperer is a base mind. They can't get enough of everyone else's business and sharing it with other people whose business is it's not their business. Slanderers, haters of Elohim, insolent, proud, boasters, devisers of evil, disobedient to parents. Slanderers is making something up about something that's not true. It's to make a libelous claim with injurious intent. Haters of Elohim, that defines all that they are and all that they do. They are hateful people because they hate the source of all their love, the one who loved them and gave them life for some mystifying reason. They hate, but they're given over to a wholly reprobate mind, and sin distorts our cognitive functions and capacities, so it makes us think that we are more qualified to be our own masters, and we hate the one who gave us life. Insolent, that just means not knowing one's place. It means being uppity, ungrateful, all the above. Proud is the sin which led to Lucifer's fall. He was number 2. The problem is he got sick of being number 2, and there's that envy, so he aspired to ascend to the mountain high, but he is brought down low to the grave. Where were we? Boasters. Now, Paul has a few things to say about boasting. He boasts in injuries, afflictions, persecutions. We read of in 2 Corinthians 2:9, 7:10, somewhere in between, thereabouts. But, he wasn't prone to self-boasting or self-exaltation, but he boasted only in the name of Yahweh. We read at the conclusion of the first chapter of 1 Corinthians, paraphrasing Jeremiah. Devisers of evil, these people live to do evil, and they love to do evil, so they devote time, they spend night and day, they sit up all night scheming evil and plots and conspiracies to get away with crime. So if one is so guided and governed by evil, of course they're going to orient their intellectual activity to devising more sophisticated ways and more efficient ways of ripping people off and doing any other type of evil. Disobedience to parents, this stems from a violation of the Decalogue. This is the 5th commandment, the first one with promise. The Israelites are promised long life on the land if they honor and respect their parents, but the way we honor and respect them is by obeying them, and disobedience to parents is one of the plagues of our time. It all started with the children of the 60s who thought they knew better than their elders. Without discernment, covenant breakers, unloving, unforgiving, ruthless. Discernment is the quality which detects that which is spiritually beneficial from that which is harmful. So without discernment, you're going to be led by error and bouncing from one immoral deed to the next without a compass or a guide or even a thought or inclination that there is another way, there is a better way. Covenant breakers, these people can't be trusted because they break the sacred bonds of trust in words, and the covenants carry consequences in breaking them. So the entire reason Israel found itself in Babylonian exile was because they had broken their covenant one too many times. Unloving, love is the motivating factor of all Christianity, so to be unloving is to be unchristian. Unforgiving, forgiveness is a trait we uniquely embody. It is the passing of it restores relationships. It's the only thing that can mend broken fences and heal broken wounds, is the spirit and power of forgiveness, and if we are forgiving, we will be forgiven in heaven. Ruthless just means you can't be too mean or too ambitious or too cynical or too devoted to others' destruction. It is an unadmirable trait. Who, though they know the righteousness of Elohim, that those who practice such deserve death, not only do the same, but also approve of those who practice them. So the idolater is an idolater by choice. Deep down inside, they know that God is real, He is true, He lives, and He will judge, yet they eliminate the idea. They have such a hostility that they eliminate Him from the ideas of their minds altogether. They know that what they are doing will merit their own death, but they are in love with sin so much so that they forfeit their eternal life. And the challenge of Romans 1:32, this is the final verse of the passage we're going to cover today, is taking now approving of those who practice them. That can mean encouraging them, but there's also vicarious thrills from sins, and we who live in the television age are put to the test and the challenge of Romans 1:32 more than anyone else. Whenever we see someone on TV sinning and we get a vicarious thrill from that, we are partakers and indulgers in the same sin as them, and we merit the same consequences knowing better. So I'm not telling you to stop watching television and movies altogether. Just be mindful of becoming vicariously guilty of sin by taking delight and pleasure in the sins of others. There are a lot more wholesome movies out there if you do struggle with this, but that's all the time we have for today. And don't let that or any other struggle deter you from walking the straight and narrow and enduring to the end. I hope that's the reason you're here. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Take care until then. Bye-bye.